the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Welcome, Arizona Cardinals fans, to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site. And this is, well, we're not going to number this episode because I don't know in what order it's going to get released. It is one of the 14 opponent preview shows that we're doing this year, as we've done the past 2 or 3 years. And we have a return guest, Alyssa Barbieri. She's got 2 roles. One, she's managing editor of Bears Wire. She came on a couple years ago. I think it was 3 years ago when the Cardinals played the Bears the last time. But she has a new title, which makes her my boss, as the senior editor of the NFL Wire site. So she not only is a colleague, but I guess we could make this the performance review if we wanted to as well. The Cardinals play the Bears this year on Christmas Eve on the road in Week 16. Alyssa, welcome to the show again. Thanks for how are things going across the wire and over there at Bears Wire?
Yeah, it's good to be back. As you know, this is kind of like our down period. This is like the deadest it's going to be. It's like a nice time to take a step back and like not be terrified to get in your car and something's going to happen, because like that's like a real fear of mine anytime I have to go out.
DeAndre Hopkins got released when I was taking books to a used bookstore to sell. I'm like,
oh man,
why? It was like the Friday before Memorial Day. I'm like, why?
Yeah, Roquan Smith got traded when I was in the turn lane going to the store, and so I had like 2 minutes, and I'm here.
David Johnson's contract extension came on a college football Saturday. I was out to lunch before an ASU game, season tickets to Arizona State, but on a Saturday afternoon, contract extension news. Why in the world would they do that? I don't know. But
that's why the Friday news dump exists. Like, we expect it. We're waiting for it.
Yes, but not Saturday afternoon.
No.
Getting ready.
That's a day of rest for NFL people.
But, welcome to the show. The Cardinals and the Bears were in a bad place a year ago. In fact, I will say this, though, the Bears, I don't know how the Colts, actually, I don't know how the Bears managed to end up with the number 1 pick, because it didn't make any sense at all. And they got number 1 pick after Week 17 because the Colts are bad. Because the Texans messed it up. Like, they were going on, and it was almost like Lovie Smith, former Bears coach, was giving a final FU to the Texans and
once
losing.
A bear, always a bear.
But let's look back on last season. Let's take it kind of timeline, 2022 season, how things went, off season, then outlook for this coming season. So 2022 was a bad one, 3-14, worse than the Cardinals, with the caveat that the Cardinals were supposed to be better. How did 2022 go in terms of level expectation going into last season?
Yeah, going into last season, I think, expectations were pretty low considering, they had you brought in Ryan Poles and he completely tore down the roster. It was a true rebuild, which is something that the Bears hadn't had. Like when Ryan Pace was here, he kept kind of, signing aging veterans, pushing money to the future. And Ryan Poles is like, well, if I'm going to build this team my way, I got to tear it all down to the bones first and then start building it up. And he knew that it was going to take a few years. So I don't think we expected much going into last season, but also didn't think it would be a 3-win season, including a 10-game losing streak to close the year out and landing the number 1 pick. Thank you, Lovey. So, I mean, it was rough last season, but the emergence of Justin Fields was something that I think that carried the Bears fandom, because it was brutal. But just kind of watching him starting to come into his own and knowing, that his ceiling is so much higher, obviously heading into this season, was something really exciting. But I mean, the defense was abysmal. And for Matt Eberflus, I mean, I think that he expected that coming in, because, you have this roster where, they traded or cut, got rid of a lot of these big contracts, these aging veterans. So you had a lot of young guys, and I believe the Bears had the most rookie minutes played last season, which is not surprising. Whether it was draft picks, there was a lot of undrafted free agents that got a lot of playing time. Injuries to some key veterans helped with that. But I mean, it was brutal on the defense because there was that one stretch where Fields really was like, oh man, my legs are, no one can catch me. And the Bears are averaging 30 points a game through 3 games. They lost all 3. I mean, because that defense was just that bad. And obviously the passing offense blew. But the rushing offense, I think it was number 1 for most of, if not the entire year. So, I mean, there were bright spots, but it was brutal. But it was nice to come out of that with that top pick.
What was that game? I think it was a Thursday night game. It was a game.
The Commanders. Oh my
God. How did they lose that game? I do not know.
That was a brutal one.
I watched that game with Justin Fields is doing everything right, and they still can't win. Just everything went wrong in that game.
Yeah, I look back at that game. I think that was the turning point for him because even at that point, he was still having his struggles there. I mean, that was his second offense in as many years since coming to the NFL, learning Luke Getsy's offense, and just nothing seemed to be clicking. And it just felt like when Darnell Mooney dropped that touchdown that, would have won the game, or it was just, it's like, oh man, this is pretty low. So it was brutal. And he was like, I'm tired of that post-game presser. He was like, I'm tired of being close. We want to get there. You could tell he was frustrated. And I really think that kind of helped him and the team. I mean, the one thing I will say about the team last year, despite them obviously only winning 3 games, was with that roster and the fact that they lost 10 games in a row. I think all but the final Lions game, they were in those games. They were competitive. Matt Eberflus kept these guys competitive, and they gave some of the top teams in the league a run for their money.
And that, honestly, the way you described that Bears team a year ago seems very familiar to what the Cardinals are doing this year. New general manager Monty Ossenfort has torn the roster down. I don't I hate when people use the word tank. Because it's not like they're trying to lose. They're just trying to put together a team that they want. And now, while I personally, people expect a 3-win season for the Cardinals, I think it'll be a little bit better because I think once Kyler Murray comes back, he's further along in his development than Justin Fields. And so I think where Fields was still feeling things out, I think Murray can lead them to a better season. But it is sort of the same process, and that leads us to what's next. So the offseason. Coming up next on the Rise Up Sierra podcast, the best of Cardinals talk of them. Let's move to the offseason. And what do they do in free agency? What do they do in the draft? That's coming up next on Rise Up Sierra. We're back on the Rise Up Sierra podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Still on the show with Alyssa Barbieri, Bears Wire managing editor, and my boss, the senior editor for the NFL Wire sites. After a 3-14 season, obviously the big move was the trading out of the number 1 pick and moving back. But we'll talk free agency first. What were the impact moves that Chicago made in terms of losses and in terms of gains?
Yeah, when you look at, who they lost, I think David Montgomery was the biggest. And I mean, kind of looking at what happened last season, Khalil Herbert, was a much better fit in Luke Getsy's system. He averaged 5.7 yards per carry in a limited role. And you really, the Bears want to see what he can do in a full-time role or extended role at least, because there's still going to be a running back by committee group. But I mean, the loss of Montgomery, they tried to re-sign him, but, they weren't going to pay what the Lions were going to be. So that was kind of, quick to move off of. But he was their main guy. I mean, there were some other losses like Nicholas Morrow at linebacker, and obviously we saw how the Bears address linebackers. So, I mean, getting Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards, I mean, just Ryan Poles completely overhauled that linebacker group from one of the worst to one of the best in the league.
Now,
so, I mean,
it was an interesting thing from the outside because they didn't want to pay Roquan Smith, and so they sent it to Baltimore only to then did roughly pay 2 guys what they would have paid Roquan?
Yeah, when you get like, and you figure that out because with the upfront money and all that with Edmonds, because Edmonds got paid. But like when you kind of look back at
Edwards was
it,
a fantastic deal. He
oh,
played
that was
extremely well,
worth it.
and I thought he was going to get much more money than he did.
Oh my gosh, that was a steal. I'm like, wait, that's it? I'm like, okay, I can do it. But when you kind of look at like them letting, trading Roquan, I mean, Tremaine Edmonds is a much better fit in Matt Eberflus's system. I think that you're starting to see how Poles and Eberflus are building this roster together, like what fits your scheme, what players are going to be the best fits. Same with letting Montgomery go, Khalil Herbert, adding Donta Foreman, and I know we're getting to the drafting Roschon Johnson. Like they're trying to find better fits for these systems. So I mean, Roquan, top linebacker in the league. I've been telling everybody that. And now that he's on the Ravens, he's finally getting the recognition. So good for you, bro. But I mean, I just think it came down to scheme fit. And like you said, I mean, when it comes down to it and you break the money down, I mean, they got 2-for-1 there. So, and I think that group is going to be huge for this defense.
Who are any other big time additions or major contributors that you're expecting to get out of their new additions?
When looking on defense, that's going to be interesting. Free agent speaking, I mean, the only guy they retained along the interior of the defensive line was Justin Jones at the 3 tech spot. But I think Andrew Billings is a mountain of a man. Like I'm looking at pictures of him, I'm like, my goodness, no, he's clogging up those run holes. So, I mean, I'm good with that. I think he's going to be a really big contributor, really underrated contributor for that defense and kind of looking there. And I mean, on offense, I think a big one was getting Nate Davis at right guard because that offensive line, putrid last season when it came to pass protection. They were better, much better against the run, but when you're Justin Fields and you're sacked 55 times in 15 games, he didn't even play a full season, like 55 times the most in 15 games. I mean, the offensive line was going to be a big focus. They shifted a lot of people. Tevin Jenkins went from right guard to left guard because Nate Davis coming in. So I think that was the big real addition on offense.
Let's look at the draft then. They made the big move moving back to number 9 and then moved back another pick to number 10 which was an interesting move because pretty much it felt like if Jalen Carter was on the board, the Bears were going to take him. And they instead made the trade with the Eagles and then moved back one spot. Now we go across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What is that? 10 picks they made in the draft. That's a heavy draft class. But the big name obviously is at number 10, Darnell Wright out of Tennessee. Some would say probably is just the absolute best pass protector in the entire draft because he went into last season. He faced the best pass rushers in college football and stonewalled them. Are they putting him right into left tackle as a rookie?
Yeah, he's an immediate plug and play guy, and they got their top tackle in the draft. They wanted someone because they decided to move forward with Braxton Jones at left tackle. So they went out and got the best pure right tackle in the draft in Darnell Wright. And again, pass protection being a focal point this season when you got to give Justin Fields time. You cannot say that they're not building around Fields this offseason when you see all the moves that they've made. And they're going to give him time to be upright and not have to run for his life this season. But yeah, Wright he's already been working with the first team during the entire offseason. He's going to be there starting at right tackle immediately. And he's going to be a big part of shoring down that new look right side of the offensive line.
And then you go round 2. So they had 2 third-round picks where they take Gervon Dexter, big athletic defensive tackle out of Florida, Tyrek Stevenson out of Miami, a cornerback. Then in round 3, they go interior Zach Pickens, a guy I liked, Roschon Johnson, the Texas running back that no one talks about because it was all about Bijan Robinson. Then they go Tyler Scott out of Cincinnati, Noah Sewell out of Oregon, linebacker, Terrell Smith, cornerback out of Minnesota, Travis Bell, Kent State? This is where my reading glasses need to come in. And then Stanford defensive back, Kendall Williamson. Of those 10 players, who are your favorites to contribute in year 1?
Oh man, there's a lot because you look at Ryan Poles and what he said immediately when he came is that he's going to build through the draft, and you saw it immediately last season how much the rookies contributed. I think we're going to see another big year from this rookie group. I think Darnell Wright obviously is the best option because he's going to be starting immediately there at right tackle, but I think Javon Dexter is someone that stood out a lot this offseason so far. He just, I mean, because there are mixed reviews about him from scouts, coming out in terms of like his motor and like, his get off. And, that's something that he has adjusted in the offseason. They're seeing a different player. He just looks, he's for someone so big, if he's 300 plus pounds, he moves so quickly. I think that he might not start immediately as a rookie. He's going to be rotating along with Zach Pickens, with Justin Jones and Andrew Billings. But I think that he's going to have a big year. I think he'll definitely prove to be a starter by the end of the year. Tyreek Stevenson's going to start immediately at cornerback on the outside opposite Jalen Johnson. Kyler Gordon's going into the slot now. So, Tyreek's going to be in there right from the beginning. I think he's going to be good. He's someone that people are underlooking. I mean, this class is loaded with some underlooked players. I think Roshan Johnson, I think he really has an opportunity to carve out a role as a long-term starter down the line at some point this season. Because when you look at him and you look at the rest of the running back room, Khalil Herbert, Donta Foreman, aside from running, rushing, they lack the pass blocking and the pass catching ability that Roshan has. And that's also something that the Bears lost with David Montgomery. So I think that Roshan can come in immediately and really challenge for more reps. Tyler Scott's going to get plenty of looks. I mean, Noah Sewell is going to be challenging for that Sam linebacker spot with Jack Sanborn. I mean, I think Terrell Smith too is someone down the line, maybe not immediately, because you kind of look at the Bears cornerback group. I think that he's someone that could prove to be really valuable down the line. They have a strong group of rookies, I think, that could see a lot of playing time this year.
We didn't even talk about what was probably the biggest addition, and that wasn't through the draft or free agency.
Technically.
but it was draft related, and that's the addition of DJ Moore. How impactful is his addition? And was he essentially part of like had to trade out of the number one pick? Not only did they have to acquire picks, but they needed an impact player.
Oh, absolutely. I think when you look at the trade for DJ Moore, that's the biggest move of the offseason because Justin Fields, you need to figure out if he's the guy this year. And you do that by doing what they didn't do the first couple of years, which is building around him. I mean, his offensive line for his first 2 years has been just very disappointing. He hasn't really had the playmakers around him. And DJ Moore is just, I mean, people don't talk a lot about him because he was in Carolina and he's playing with some of these subpar quarterbacks. But, what he was able to accomplish in his first 5 seasons, he already had 3 1,000-yard seasons with some pretty, low poor quarterback play. So, I mean, that move, I mean, he's a draft pick essentially, right? You traded the number one pick for him. So he's an additional draft pick that you get this year.
The Cardinals have done that over the years. I love our second round draft pick, DeAndre Hopkins. We like our second round draft pick, Chandler Jones. That was Steve Keim's joke every year. That said, it's not technically a draft pick, but it was an acquisition through draft capital. That said, if you look at Kyler Murray got DeAndre Hopkins, Josh Allen got Stephon Diggs, Joe Burrow got Jamar Chase. So you take those guys away, and we saw what Josh Allen looked like before Stephon Diggs. It was erratic. And so giving him a big-time playmaker, how impactful is that? Come on. And then you go Jalen Hurts this past year with A.J. Brown and how much the passing game improved there.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, DJ Moore gives Justin Fields a number one receiver he hasn't had since Ohio State. And it's crazy because obviously Fields is known for his ability to run. He is, elite athleticism. It's incredible what he can do. But people also forget that he didn't really utilize that a lot in college because he was more known for throwing the deep ball and his deep ball accuracy. And that's something that, it's still there, but he kind of needs some help around him at the NFL level. And I think getting DJ Moore is going to not only help Fields, but it's going to help the rest of the receiving core around him. Darnell Mooney, he thrived in the wide receiver 2 role when Allen Robinson was here. He's coming back from injury. I think he's going to have a big year. Chase Claypool is also going to benefit from his addition. And it's really alarming how quickly that Fields and Moore have developed this chemistry. And, listening to people watching DJ Moore during the offseason they're just like, wow, we haven't seen someone here like that before, and how he's already impacting, the receiver room, the chemistry with him and Fields, and just how impressive that is. I'm just super excited to see it on the field in live action. I think it's going to be huge. I think now at this point, there's no more excuses for Fields. And I think this is the point we wanted to get to, because it's hard to evaluate him after the first 2 seasons and everything that had been going on. But now, here you go. You're going to see what he's all about. And I think that he's going to take a big step forward in the passing game. I don't want to compare him to Jalen Hurts specifically, but I mean, when you look at, like you mentioned, all these young quarterbacks finally getting that number one receiver, and how it helps them in their development, and helps them really open it up in the passing game, I think that people are going to be surprised this year with what Fields can do.
And with that, coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's look ahead to the 2023 season, outlook, expectations, and more. That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, best our Cardinals talk on the web, still talking to Alyssa Barbieri, Bears Wire, managing editor, also senior editor at the NFL Wire sites for USA Today. Looking ahead to 2023, they've built around Justin Fields. What are then the expectations for the 2023 season? What are the high end? Like, I like talking about high end, reasonable, and then the floor. What are high end expectations for this team?
Yeah, I think high-end expectations, you are competing for a wild card spot, and you're making it as a wild card spot, winning 10 games. I mean, I feel like that would kind of be the high point of the ceiling. When you kind of look at how much this roster has been overhauled, not only on offense, but on defense. And the one thing that just really stood out from last year was how competitive that the Bears were with an underwhelming roster, and how Matt Eberflus and this culture has really, shaped how these guys play. And I think that if that's what he was able to get out of that group, I think that that they could push 10 wins at, for a really high ceiling, right? But I think more reasonable expectations, I'm expecting like 8 wins, maybe 9, kind of similar to what the Lions were able to do last year, where you're in the conversation, you should be contending, but you don't necessarily get there because you're still a year away. I think that's the most reasonable. And as far as the floor, I mean, I don't think they're going to win 3 games again. I mean, that was pretty hard, but I'd probably say about like 5. Like, so 5 wins would kind of be the floor.
And that's assuming that, I always say that, what's their floor? What's the worst case scenario? Look, that's not Justin Fields getting hurt or anything, but like just like the worst case scenario of how they play on the field. So you see some improvement, but a little bit. But reasonable expectations were they're playing meaningful football up through the first week of January, right? So up until the end of the season, they're playing meaningful football, and they're in the conversation, even if they're outside, like on the outside looking in the whole time. That's being in the mix. And, people say fans should have higher expectation. Actually, all that really matters as fans, can you have a team worth watching through the end of the season? Other than like, are you watching because they're competitive, or are you watching because, come on, let's lose? Let's get this draft.
The number one pick.
Number one pick.
That's how Bears fans were last year. Like the last few games when it's like, oh, wait, this is attainable? Wait, hold on a second. And it's like, do we really want them to beat the Packers? Like, when you're getting towards the end, it's like, okay, this is Aaron Rodgers last year. Let's get that number one pick. So, yeah.
That's interesting. Now, as Bears fans look at their schedule and they see the Cardinals at home, Week 16, Christmas Eve, what is sort of the view of that game? Is that we're definitely winning that game? Is it a likely win, or is it going to be a battle type game?
I mean, it depends too on, Kyler Murray's status.
Yes, for sure.
Obviously, how quickly he comes back, if he's playing in that game, I'm not sure of, his rehab time and when he's expected, when he's, going to be 100%, because he's always a threat, just like Justin Fields. I mean, it's really difficult to game plan for him. I mean, I would say, given current expectations, I think I would lean more towards a likely win. I mean, it'll be in Chicago in the cold. I mean, that's also an element, right? So, I mean, I'll say likely win. I would never say it's a guaranteed win, because, the Bears had the worst record in the league last year, and they got to prove themselves.
Well, and so, though for our perspective, now I expect Kyler to be playing and playing his best ball by that time after his injury, because he's not going to be back week 1, but I think it'll be about week 6. I think it'll be about week 6. And so he'll have been able to play most of the season, get his legs back under him. And honestly, I know the Cardinals have low expectations, but the Bears game is one of the games that we look at as a winnable game, like as the actual winnable game. There's like 4 or 5 winnable games. There's like 5 no chance games, and then a handful of, well, maybe. But yeah, so we look at that end of the and I think that honestly that game will be a good measuring stick of both teams for different reasons. The Bears maintaining being in the conversation, and then the Cardinals for what they're moving towards, because I think I have the Cardinals personally winning 6-7 wins, having 6-7 wins, and that is on the more optimistic side. But if you're thinking about what they're trying to work toward, if they're playing games at the end of the year competitively and can steal a win or 2 in there, that is kind of what they're building for. For Bears fans, it's maintaining part of the conversation late in the year, maintaining being in the mix. And the Cardinals, it's about getting toward being in the mix, because I think the Cardinals will be. I mean, I have them starting at like 1-2-7, and then going up and going 5-3. I think after the final 8 games, and that's. Because they do have games. They've got the Bears, they've got the Falcons, they've got the Texans in the second half of the season. And those are 3 even if the Cardinals are bad, they're 3 winnable games on paper, at least. But
then we come back to that tanking conversation. If that number 1 pick is in sight, what do you do?
I don't think Jonathan Gannon is talking about the first pick overall. I think the GM is putting them in position to maybe, but I think they have their eyes, and it's not like the team is actively trying to lose. They just want to win with different players, and knowing that there's going to be struggles. Like the Cardinals' defense, garbage. Like on talent, the defensive line you've never heard of. You might have heard of one of them in Carlos Watkins, and he's the most accomplished defensive lineman on that entire unit, and he's a journeyman at best. So yeah.
So you're like a much more talented Bears last year.
I think so. I think that's kind of what it is. Yeah. You've got slightly more talent and a quarterback that's farther along in his development, which is why I hope that it's not like the Bears season. That's what most nationally the Cardinals are being viewed as, that they're going to have that type of season. But I think it's going to be a little bit better because their roster is slightly more talented than the Bears a year ago, and a healthy Kyler Murray is farther along than Justin Fields, even though they might have the same type of ceiling. So, but yeah, so winnable game for you guys, winnable game for us. Probably a more necessary win for the Bears at that point in the year than the Cardinals, and will be a good measuring stick of things moving forward. But
yeah, we'll see. I still have flashbacks to the last time they played and Andy Dalton was in there, and it was just
here's the thing. I'm sad because the Cardinals 4 straight years have faced Andy Dalton on a different team and they went 4-0 against Andy Dalton, who was and every single time. It was the Saints last year, there was the Bears before that, it was the Cowboys before that, and it was whatever team was before the Cowboys, but they beat him 4 straight years.
Oh wow. Do they play the Panthers?
No, they don't play the Panthers.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, if you caught him week 1, maybe, if they're not starting Bryce Young, but I still think they're going to go with
Bryce. That's the thing. When you say with the Panthers, are like, dang it, we're not going to get the win against Andy Dalton. But yeah, so.
Oh, man. Hey, maybe Justin can make it 1-0. Let's go.
All right. Well, thank you, Alyssa, for your time. It's fantastic. Get to talk Bears, Cardinals. But that will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Secret podcast. You can find Alyssa's work on BearsWire.com. Alyssa, where else can they find your work? When I get asked this on podcasts, I'm like, your listeners aren't going to go look for Cardinals content. But in case they do, can they find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter at Alyssa Barbieri, and I post all my stuff over there.
Have you moved to Threads yet?
I did.
I created a Threads
account. It's a lot to juggle too. I didn't realize. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting tired of doing both. Can we have like an app where it does both at the same time? That would be incredible.
Right. True Anthem, maybe? your anthem?
Oh, yeah, I was thinking that. I'm like, I don't know if your anthem's doing it, though. I'm like, darn.
All right. Thank you so much, Alyssa. That'll wrap up this edition of the show. We'll have another show with another opponent preview coming probably in the next day or two. Thanks for listening. That'll wrap up this edition of the show. Thank you for listening in as always. Stop. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.